Hey. Okay, now I'm live. Okay, I was just talking to myself all this time, you guys. Sorry about that. I just realized I didn't press the right button. So here I am. I'm at the studio space down on the lakeshore. And this is one of my works you're seeing right here. So you can see my, this is acrylic on canvas. And it's meant for a public space, this work. And I'm gonna just show you what the whole canvas looks like. So you can see the back side of the canvas too. So you can see that it's all wood. And the reason why I've put my these stretch canvases over top of this shell like this was because it was going to be in public space and a lot less chance of people poking it and, you know, making a dent in the canvas, because that does happen if people touch it. And I figured since it was in a public space that I needed to think about my work on those terms and in the long run too, because I don't know how long this work will be there for, but according to some of my teachers in OCAD over the years, they said, well, the gesso is the only unknown thing about all paintings at this point. And I asked why, and they said it's because they don't know how long gesso will last. It's different from the gesso that used to be put on the canvases back in the day, you know, with Leonardo da Vinci and those folks. Because the gesso, they used the same elements, but what they were using to bind it together was rabbit skin glue. So we know that works because those paintings are still sitting in the museums and they haven't fallen apart. That's a good thing. So we're just thinking that they're thinking that the acrylic polymers that they use to bind it together are very much unknown at this point. I'm just going to just turn this crazy camera around so you can see me. So here I am, and just still in my studio space. I have a really nice space here. I got it for about 6 months. I live in the Lakeshore Village Artist Co-op, and so they have this big space, a shared space for the artists here. And you can also use your own studio space, and I do use my own studio space quite often because sometimes I have two things going on, something going on down here and then something going on at my studio space at home. So I'm just going to give you a quick view. I'm going to see if quick view of this work here. Okay, so I'm just going to take you around. You can see this is the beginning of the painting right here. So I have the drawing. It's a rough drawing. It's a thumbnail sketch, but it's good enough to put enough details on there that you can pretty much get most of the work done just by looking at the way that's designed. And here's some background information to this work too. So you can see what you're looking at here is the way the turtle's back was divided up into 13 spaces. Because in real life, a snapping turtle does have these spaces on its back just like that. There are 13 main segments in the back, and then the little segments on the outer edge, there are 28. So that's what makes the 13 moon calendar out of the turtle's back. So the turtle is actually reflecting what's going on in nature and what's going on in a planetary way, because the Earth goes around the sun once a year. And the calendar, the Roman calendar says it's 365 days a year, but it's really 364. And so the 13 moons, it goes to go around the Earth, the sun once. The moon goes around the Earth 13 times a year. So that's what this represents. And it represents the star formations that were used as a way of measuring what certain points of the year a person could do. So take a look at the stones around the outer edge of the drawing here. You can see that those stones, they are in the cardinal points, cardinal directions, and that's what they used as an astronomical observatory So they would be monitoring the skies, and certain kinds of star formations would go across and come down on the horizon of the Earth. And that medicine wheel, we'll call it a petroform, was laid out in such a way that each one of these points along the wheel itself would mean a planting season or a harvest season. And that's how Indigenous people survived, is that they learned about all the different seasons. So I'm just going to go back to the color version now. And you can see that it has these different meanings for each of the different moons. Like the first one here is the spirit moon. This one's the bear moon. This is the sugar moon, because we get the syrup, the sap from the tree, and create this delicious syrup. And this is maple tree. And then this is the sucker moon, or the fish moon, and that's a time when you would harvest. So this is like in April. And then down here is the flower moon. And so like in the spring, there are certain flowers that come out right in the beginning, and one of those is the dogwood is one of the first flowers to come out in spring. And sometimes you'll see there's a little yellow flower, it's called colt's foot, that comes out too in the spring. This one here is the strawberry moon, and here is the raspberry moon, and this is the thimbleberry moon, and then this is the corn moon. So harvesting too, that's a harvest time. And then here's the falling leaves moon, and the spirit moon, and the big spirit moon, little spirit moon. Oh, sorry. This is the ice moon. So this is the time of freezing, and this is the little spirit moon, and this is the big spirit moon. So those are the 13 moons. I'm just gonna, and then here's another. This is the muskrat. That's part of the story of Turtle Island. I just put that there to represent that. So let me get back to these questions that I have to answer. So how long have you been affiliated with the Tobacco Arts? I've been affiliated with the Tobacco Arts, not officially, but I've been aware of them, and I've known other artists who work with them. And I did have a chance of working with them back in 2008. So quite a bit of time at this point, and that's pretty good that they're an organization that's been around that long. And just want to look at this one here. This is some of the details on the thinner part for this mural, and this is going on the back stretch of a part of the wall that becomes very narrow. But they still wanted to have some connection to the main mural, so I've added these fish. And for the connection, that the fish is also part of one of the clans. And here's the tail of the turtle, and that rides up on the back of that panel. Same. And these markings on the painting, these are power symbols. And if you look at the woodland style painting, you can see that this kind of design and pattern in Norval Morrisseau's work. So, but mine is a much more contemporary feel than Norval's. And Norval's work really is incredible when you get a chance to go see them. Like, he was a real genius in terms of color and putting colors together and creating this real great feeling when you look at his work. Okay, what is something about what do people don't know about me? Here, I'll just switch this around now. So I guess what people don't know about me is I guess that I'm a historian and I'm a scholar. I do a lot of writing. Well, mainly now I do a lot more writing on the social media, Facebook and Instagram. I like to put a lot of literature out with my artwork, because a lot of people don't really know what they're looking at. And so I look at that for me as being an interpreter of culture. So I break down a lot of what people are seeing on my artwork in terms of symbols and stories that go behind some of the animals and the creatures that I paint in my works, especially the woodland style, you know, because that it doesn't always speak for itself. And I think that's the thing about creating the work, is that you need to, if you're an artist putting work out there, it's okay if you want to have that mysterious and you want to have this ambiguous kind of artwork, but if you're not into that and you're kind of creating representations of things, then you should talk a little bit about that. So you're not only creating artwork, but you're educating people so that they can have a better understanding, and you can educate people and help them to be more open to these cultural separations that are still prevalent in Canada, because Indigenous people still have there's a mystery about us, and that comes from the education system and residential schools and other things like that. And that's something that is not talked a lot about in art, or even on the media, because even the news channels, you know, when they're talking about a lot of disputes that go on between Indigenous people and the communities, a lot of people just don't know about the treaties that were signed by Indigenous people, and just how old these treaties are, and what was the circumstances of the agreement between the Indigenous people. And many times at that time it was the Crown or the Royal, because this was a colony. When it first started, the first footsteps of this becoming a country, it was a colony, a British colony, and a lot of people forget that when they look at the way North America was divided up between the two countries, Canada and the U.S. And the U.S. is really, they are an extension of the British too, because I know they claim to be Americans, but they're British subjects, and they revolted, and that's what formed America. So I don't want to get into that, because that's a big long story, and it's not what we're here for, even though it's very interesting. What do you do with your spare time when you're not creating art? Well, I like to do research and on historic events. I'm really thinking about going back to get a PhD. I'm going to apply this year, and I'll see if I get a response. I'll go back and get a PhD, and I want to write a book about these differences, cultural differences. I want to write about art, but I want to put it in a context how art informs, culture and history for Indigenous people. And the other thing that I do in my spare time is I do still participate and practice my culture a lot, and that's something that I think is really important for me. Especially, I was honored with the title of Spiritual Elder years ago by Vern Harper, and I've been, experienced a lot of ceremonies with Vern over the years, since 1981, as one of the first ceremonies I ever experienced with Vern. And so I've been getting a lot of knowledge and experience, and just being in these small circles of Indigenous people that were practicing their culture. And I know it's very difficult for people to understand why do we need to do that still? Well, because that is the center of where we Indigenous people develop our identity and our connection to our history, culture, our ancestors, and the land. So we have a lot of things that are connected with the participation in that culture. And for me, I know that that's the right thing. I've been doing the right thing for a long time. And I know it's the thing that kept me grounded, even through the pandemic here. I've been grounded because of my cultural experience and practice. It's allowed me to just take a step back and be an observer for a while all of this chaos is going on with people being, what do they call it? They've been saying a familiar term that people are making these sacrifices because their normal pathways in life have been halted. People getting jobs and things like that. Okay, so let's get to another question before I run out of time here. So what is the go-to meal you make for guests? So I guess one of my favorite things, especially around Christmas, around the beginning of the new year. So the last moon of this year is December 21st. You know, that's the spirit moon. I do a New Year's celebration on that day, and I honor the 13th moon on that day, and I like to make a buffalo stew. So I get buffalo meats and all the vegetables that go with it, and I make a stew, and I share that with everyone. And then I'm not an expert at making the bannock, so I get my sister to make the bannock, and she makes the bannock, I make the stew, and then I invite people down to Hyde Park, and we'll do a smudge ceremony and a pipe ceremony. I don't share the pipe with everyone at this point in time because it's so dangerous now, but even still, you know, sharing the pipe has been something that we normally did for a long time, but now it's become very difficult because of all the new diseases out there. We can't share that pipe like we used to. But I do in a different way. So the people don't put their lips to the pipe anymore. I usually just tap them on their forehead. And that's how my elders told me how to do it long ago. And that wasn't for people in general. That's how we would keep the children in part of the ceremony. The children couldn't be smoking the pipe. So the elder would tap their forehead to let the spirits know that these people are part of the ceremony. And that was one way we did it. Okay, so that's one of the things I do like to cook for my guests. Another specialty of mine is just like a simple meatloaf with vegetables and things like that. It's always pretty tasty and it's easy to make. What is the most meaningful art experience that you've had? I guess the most meaningful art experience I've had, I would say that it's connecting with a spirit. And I'm going to explain this to you because this happened back in 2002. I was doing a mural for the Mississaugas, and it was the creation story of the Anushnavi. It was quite a large work. It was 1,000 square feet, and I had vignettes of points in that story when they talk about the creation story all across this huge wall. And I had put some really interesting designs on there, and ones that I wasn't sure, but I just put my intuitive let it go first. And so I picked things that I wasn't sure about, but I wanted them on there anyway. And so I picked a couple of pictographs that I thought were really interesting, and I didn't know what they were exactly, but I knew that they belonged on the mural. So what happened was when we did the opening for the mural, some elders came, and one elder in particular came, and he started talking about these pictographs that were on there, and he knew right away. And he started to interpret what he was looking at. And he just said that these were what we created on the whole wall. He said one of the images was a pictograph, and it looked like a map. It had all these different symbols around this trail, and the trail kind of bent at one end and then came back on itself, and at the end it had this big circle with a sphere in the center of it. And he just said that this is the whole creation story that we depicted here, but this is the pictographic form of that storytelling. And I thought that was amazing, that I had the good sense to put that on there, that we were actually recreating that story in a different way, but in a way it's the same thing, because those little pictures were on that pictograph were the same thing that we were depicting on the big story here. And so that was good to know that my intuition was correct in picking that as part of the design for this whole mural. The other thing that the elder said to me, and his name was Leon Secretero. So he was a Navajo elder, and he came up here for a special event, but he wanted to see the mural. And so he just said the other important thing about this little symbol here is, he said, the way it curves back on its self, he said, it represents for him it represented the scorpion. And they have their own kind of pictographs in Navajo land and territory. And so he said the scorpion is, he said, first he drew a little pictograph and he asked everyone to try and guess what it was. And I guessed that it was a scorpion. And he said, yes, that's correct, it's a scorpion. And he said, do you know what the scorpion is doing? And I said, well, he looks like he's standing there with his tail the way they stand, you know, with their tail arched in the air. Anyways, so he starts explaining that the scorpion is, why the scorpion is such a powerful symbol was because the scorpion knows that it's traveling through the universe. And of course, we just have to listen. We're not going to question the elder about why he's talking about the scorpion that way. But anyways, so he goes on to explain it more in detail, and he says that we're traveling through the universe at around 17,000 miles an hour. That's just how fast Earth and our whole solar system is moving. And I just have to listen, and I think that's pretty amazing that he knows that. And he said, what's interesting about this scorpion is, he said, the scorpion is a good representation of us Indigenous people. And he goes on to say that, see, the scorpion knows who he is, and he knows why he's here, and he's doing what he's supposed to do, which is be a scorpion. And that tail arcing means that he knows why he's here. And he connects the pictograph to the scorpion. He said that big arc on the pictograph, he said that arc is doing the same thing the scorpion's doing, is creating this loop. And so the scorpion creates the loop because he knows we're traveling through the universe, and while we're traveling through the universe, there's energy being collected by the scorpion from making the loop on his back with his tail that he knows. That's why he walks that way and has his tail up in the air. He knows who he is and what his purpose is here. So he's saying that the people who know their story, their creation story, they know why they're here. And they're doing the same thing that the scorpion is doing, is creating that loop. And they're going through life collecting energy, because this world, the way it is and the way it's presented itself in this kind of Western fashion, is something that's not as real as the Indigenous way people see. So I don't think I said that the right way, but what I meant to say was that we're not shown everything the way the Western people talk about the universe. Our ancestors understood the universe and our place within that universe much more intimately and deeper than the way Western people see that universe. And we know that there's a relationship between the earth and the universe that's ongoing. You know, that's why when Indigenous people have ceremonies, you'll notice that there's always some kind of trees involved. And the reason why the trees are involved is because the trees send signals out into the universe all the time. And that's why they make these connections with the trees in our ceremonies. Because when we practice our ceremonies, we're sending our thoughts out into the universe just like the trees. So I better answer these other questions, and let's see. So why do I think the community arts are important? Well, because this opens up the door to culture. You know, I'm going to just turn the phone around. I'm going to just take a look around one more time. So this opens up the door to culture, and so you can see where I am. Here's my my neighborhood. So this is the studio. So here's the studio door, and So the community arts are something that give people a chance to see culture like in a everyday setting, you know, like the neighborhood. And you know, what's really interesting for me about that idea of the community arts is that it is the same thing that our ancestors used to practice, which was making the pictographs and petroglyphs all across the land. They were sending messages out to the whole community when they did that. So community arts, for me, is doing the same thing that our ancestors did, that we knew that these messages were important for everyone. It wasn't just for a few people, but the messages were meant for everybody to see, because everybody had a chance to kind of understand and know what was going on in their community. And one way to do it was to create these images that were put into public spaces. So one of the most famous public spaces that I can think of is called Petroglyph Park in Peterborough. And what's really a close connection for me in this idea of community arts is that when those ancestors were creating these works, they were creating messages not just for a temporary use, but a long-term use. Especially, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but those pictographs, they've been painted on the rocks in the northern Ontario. Those paintings, they'll stand up there for 5,000 years because the paint is so sturdy that the paint stays on those rocks for 5,000 years. And the pictographs, or the petroglyphs, are even more outstanding, because those rock carvings, they might stay on there for 10,000 years. This culture, the way it is in North America right now, could come and go. And all that will be left still of the culture will be on those rocks. Isn't that a crazy thought when you think about that? So yeah, I think there's a lot of really great connections. Here's my friend Nellie. And hi Nellie.
Hi.
She's helping me work on the mural. And then there's Jennifer's over there. She's another artist in the co-op. And she's working on her own work. And so we do have like a community here at the co-op, and that's really kind of old school. You know, that's something that was part of the way Indigenous people did things too, was always in a collective, getting all the information together and sharing their knowledge so that the people could all benefit from that collective gathering and knowledge. And let me just see, I gotta check the notes here and make sure I'm saying everything that I need to talk about in terms of this. So, all right, so let me see if there's any questions here. I'll just wave to everybody. Okay, yeah. So how, you know, I work with the TDSB too. So TDSB is like my connection to the community, and that's how I work with children. So I go into schools through, they have a program, and the title of the organization is called the UIEC. It's an urban Indigenous education center, and what they did was, it used to be called the Aboriginal Education Center, but now it's changed. But the idea was to get Indigenous artists into the schools and bring in the real culture by Indigenous artists, so that the idea of appropriation and a truer narrative of our culture and history is being brought into the education system, not just for the students, but it's also for the teachers too, because that is the root of change, is to educate the teachers as well, so that they have a better understanding about why it's important that this Indigenous narrative become part of a normal experience for all of the young people, because that is the beginning of systemic racism. So if you have these ongoing misrepresentations of our culture and our history within settler culture, that's what continues systemic racism. And the only way to change that is by putting yourself out there as an Indigenous artist and sharing your knowledge and understanding about our culture and our history. If you know things about our history, you can begin to change the way people see us, because it's the only way that things will change. And it's a really good way of changing them, because even the media out there is hard to control. We don't have control over the media, like the TV, the radio, magazines. More and more interesting stories are being put into those kinds of meetings, but the TV is slowly changing. But there's so much of the old ways of telling that settler history in regard to Indigenous people that still kind of keeps this systemic racism at a certain kind of level. It doesn't extinguish it, but things are slowly changing, and I think that's the important part. So, is there a difference of how you approach a mural as versus piece of art? So, murals and piece of art, they're all the same thing. But the murals, it depends on location, and if especially if it's for a commission, I ask about what the place is, space is, and what are they interested in. And if they're interested in culture and history, then I can easily figure out something to put in that, because I know the history of Toronto going back to the Ice Age. So I talk about that history when I do my bus tours, or and I've done a couple of virtual tours online, Zoom, bringing people across the city on a virtual tour. I have images that I use for my talking about that kind of history, and it's important because being able to go back to the Ice Age here in Toronto, it's so easy, because a lot of people don't know that Davenport Road is actually the edge of the ice wall that came down from the north, and it was part of the symbol of the Ice Age itself. But it was a environmental effect that changed the way North America was for 100,000 years. So I talk about this ancient wall that used to be here, and I talk about the Indigenous people who used to be here, and we called those Indigenous people the ice runners. And so to say it in the language, it's Okwaming Aniniwag, which means the ice runners. And so these people were really good at surviving around that environment. They didn't run away to the warm, sunny part of the continent. They stayed up here, and they lived through this experience of having the Ice Age here. Not only that, but they had these amazing world that they were living in, because they were living in with the megafauna. So it was a very completely different world. Maybe some people might think it would have been terrifying to live back in those times with those giant animals that the people here had to live with. But for me, when I look at that history, I go back to that point and just think about some of the major points along this city of Toronto that are part of the reason why it's called Toronto, like the name itself, being the fishing where sticks stand in the water, or meeting place. They all mean the same thing. That's what Toronto means. But also that fishing weir that they talk about, and the reason why this Toronto name is even around is because that's what Lake Simcoe used to be called. And Lake Simcoe was Lac Toronto. So when the first European explorers made their way into Ontario back in the 1600s, one of the first places they went to was the big fishing weir that was in Lake Simcoe. Well, what we call Lake Simcoe now, but it was called Lac Toronto. And there was another lake beside it called Couchiching. So you had Lac Toronto and you had Couchiching. So you had this relationship between the Anushnavi and the Wendat. And that's what's not talked about either. We don't know a thing about that relationship between these two nations, but they had one. And that's why they were coexisting with one another since the arrival of the Wendat. And the arrival of the Wendat happened between 8,000 and 9,000 years ago. So, okay, I'm not going to get too much into this history thing, but that's my understanding. That's my answer to that one question. And believe me, I could go on and on and on. We could talk about this stuff for 3 hours, no problem. But I don't think I have that long on here. I can't remember exactly how much time I'm going to be allowed to have on this studio visit. Okay, so is there any more questions out there, you guys? And once again, thanks everyone for listening to this studio visit. It's a pleasure. Just letting people see that I do all day long, that I have all this amazing work that I'm working on. I'm going to give you a close-up view of what the paint looks like up close, because I think that's something that people don't often get to see. So you can see the paint, the texture. Yeah. So this is my big snapping turtle. And this is the petroform, the big circle of stones. And up there, you can see the Big Dipper. And down here, it's the Little Dipper. So a lot of people don't know. See the way the Big Dipper is shaped out? It has the 7 stars. So the 2 stars on the very end of the little bucket point directly down to this star here, and that's the North Star, Polaris. And that's how, if you ever get lost up north and you don't have a compass and your cell phone's not working and you don't know which way to go, if you wait till the nightfall, you'll see where the North Star is, and you'll know that's north, and everything opposite of that is south. You can find your way home. Isn't that nuts? And if you're going to the, if you're looking at the North Star and you go to the left, you're going west. And if you go to the right, you're going east. That's one of my tricks. Don't ever get lost. You shouldn't get lost now that you know that story. And so these are a couple of the star formations that I thought were really important to put on the mural. And then this last one here, this is the Pleiades, or what Indigenous people call the hole in the sky, because when you look at it up in the sky, it looks like a circle from where we are here on Earth. But that's a really significant cultural connection to talk about the hole in the sky, because I know we have a couple of Indigenous groups of nations here in this part of the world. So we have the Haudenosaunee people, we have the Wendat, and we have the Anushnavi. These are 3 major groups of Indigenous people in North America. They've made a major impact on this part of the continent, and they've been here for a very long time. And when we talk about the Haudenosaunee people, we have to think about the beginning of the Haudenosaunee people, and we think about the sky woman coming down from the sky and coming down from a hole in the sky. And I think that's kind of interesting that group of stars is called the hole in the sky. And the same goes for the Wendat people. They too have a woman that comes down from the sky, from a hole in the sky. And I think that's very interesting stuff. There's lots more connections there. We don't have time to talk about all that. But that hole in the sky, today, how it references our culture is that we have a special ceremony. It's called shaking tent ceremony. And the shaking tent ceremony is a healing ceremony. People go to the elder for knowledge about a problem they have, or they're looking for something, or they're not well, and they want to get well, and so the elder goes into that lodge, the shaking tent ceremony. And how the shaking tent ceremonies are usually constructed is they have these poles. Sometimes it's 7 and sometimes it's 13, but 7 is the one that they make into this giant pod. And there's just enough room for that elder to stand inside. And it looks like a big seed pod, and it's wrapped up. And I've been to Yuwipi ceremonies, and they're very similar. But that shaking tent ceremony, the spirits come right into that. And if you've ever been to one, and you've been to outside one, you can watch. Sometimes you can see all the animals running into that lodge once it gets going. And they're going in there to assist that elder to get the information about the questions that people had and were looking for help for. And one thing that I heard about this hole in the sky was that the shaking tent itself is a conduit that takes that elder right to the hole in the sky for the knowledge about how these people could get the help that they need here. So, and what I've heard before too is that the hole in the sky is where our ancestors are, that they're all there watching us from way up there, watching what's happening down here on Earth. And for me, that's pretty, it's a mystery. And I like to think about those things and keep my mind open to that kind of knowledge, because I don't know everything. And I think that's a good way for me to be as an artist, is that you always kind of keep your mind open. Don't close it off and think you know everything, because that's not the way life should be, and that's not the way an artist should be. Artists should always be open to hear these stories, because some of these stories, I've seen things that I can't explain, and I know that it's because that there are still great mysteries in this lifetime that it might never be answered, but I'll always keep my thoughts and mind open to that way of thinking and looking at things. So that's my story about the hole in the sky. And it's one of those important star formations that comes down on the edge of that horizon, where people are using that old technology that's 5,000 years old. And I'm going to tell you something. Where they have this petroform, where that petroform used to be here in Toronto, was in High Park. So if you've been to High Park and you've been to the little restaurant, well, there's a little hill in the north side of the parking lot, and that hill is where the petroform used to be, the medicine wheel. And that medicine wheel was transported across, that technology was transported across North America because of the trade network that used to be operating for 5,000 years. So that trade network operated for 5,000 years. And a lot of people don't know this, but High Park has been cultivated for 5,000 years. And how we know this is because burn marks, charcoal marks were found in the striations when they were digging holes in Hyde Park, and they realized that these striations go down 5,000 years of time. So for 5,000 years, Indigenous people were practicing this trade network and this culture. So that connects, so that medicine wheel connects to the trade network, and the trade network connects to Lac Toronto, and Lac Toronto connects to the Northwest Territories, and they connect down to Central America, Mexico, and where all those Indigenous people were down there. So they found things from all of these places here in Toronto. So Toronto's been operating a trade network for 5,000 years, and that's what this petroform represents, is that shared technology. The Indigenous people indeed did share technology with one another to assist one another having a successful community. So, and I like to think that we're still doing that, especially the educators and the artists and the historians out there. We're still trying to do our job of having a good purpose for being here and being alive. Because, you know, we often forget that there is a purpose for all of us for being here. But if you follow your cultural practice and your roots, quite often that practice leads us to ask questions about our purpose here. Like, why are we here? We're not just here because it was an accident, because our mother and dad, you know, are having good times, and then all of a sudden we came along. No, our purpose here is much deeper than that, and it's about more of a spiritual connection than anything else, because we're here to prosper and help others to prosper. Okay, is there any more questions out there? You guys, anything else you want to say? I don't think. Okay, well, thank you for listening to me talk about this work. And maybe I'll just give you a little bit, talk about these. Here's my little fish on this one. And I gotta still finish the eye on here. It's not quite done, but everything else is pretty done. And you can see that this is like the Norvell Morrisseau style fish. They call it the X-ray style of painting. And but what this is, these are all the shapes of the spirit inside that fish. And so you create a design that has this kind of brightness about it that makes you feel good when you look at it. And that's why I always like to put these little hearts on my fish, so that people looking at it know that that's my intention, that I'm thinking about the good things. So on the eyes, on these, a lot of the woodland style painting, that eye, if you notice, go look at all the Morrisseau paintings, you'll see that they're all yellow. The reason why it's yellow is because it represents the life, new life coming. Because every morning, the sun comes up, and that's the yellow light that comes into the planet every day. And that's the thing that makes new life happen. And that's why these eyes are put here. And that light, it represents love. So that yellow light is actually the color of love. So if you look at our medicine wheel, in the eastern doorway, it's yellow. Western doorway is black. And when you put those two colors together, it means life and death. And those are the two things. So one is the beginning of life. And when you get to the western door, it's where our ancestors are. So these are symbolic connections. It's even like every day we're shown that, you know, when the sun comes up, it's about that new life coming in every day. And when it sets, it's about a reminder that one day that is going to end. It's not meant to be kind of morbid, but if you look on the bright side of that idea, is that it's a reminder to make sure you do something good, make sure you're going to leave something good behind, because it's this lifetime that we have is such a short time. Especially when you get halfway through it, you realize there's not much time left. And you realize that you want to make sure you leave something, a legacy. So when you start thinking like that, legacy terms, that's what I call heart thinking. And heart thinking is long-term thinking. It's about thinking about the future, thinking about 7 generations from now. When they look back, did you do enough while you were here? Did you try to make changes to things that were unjust to people? So, okay, I'm just going to take a look around in my studio. So these are other painters that are in the studio with me. They work here too. This is a shared space, so the whole co-op, everybody has different kinds of styles and works and things. And we're lucky because no one's here today except for Jennifer. She's here. And yeah, these colors are the 7 grandfather colors. So, you know, each of the grandfathers have a color. So you have, and how you can get an understanding what these are is that you can just look at the medicine wheel. There's 4 colors. red, black, white, yellow. And then there's also, so this is what a real artist trolley looks like. Look at all the brushes this guy has. And look at all that. There's nice drawing starting, new painting. Yeah. Everybody's doing all this amazing work here. I'm just gonna bother Jennifer for a second. Hello, Jennifer. There's Jennifer. She's working on a portrait.
Yeah.
So it looks great.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so just so you can see how, like, some of the paint, like the paint strokes, you know, it looks great when you look at that, how thick that paint is put on there. I like to do that because it's like more so, you know, he's like puts his paint on that thick too. And these are like the little bony horns on the tail of that turtle. Snapping turtles have these little horns that sit on the tail. So that's the other connection to that tail. This comes right to here. Okay, folks, is there any more questions? Okay, let me see if I can see if there's any more questions here. Oh, yeah, here's my table. I can see all the stuff I have all my. I like to use these kind of containers to hold my paint in because it keeps the paint wet for a long time, for days, which is really great. And what's good about these containers is that they're cheap. You can buy tons of them and have all different colors on your table anytime you want. So you mix your colors up and you put them inside those containers. And then of course I have like all of these, I have this huge assortment of brushes that I use too when I'm painting, all different kinds. So here you go. Sometimes I use these flat ones to get the paint on nice and smooth. That's the kind I use. And then I use these brown ones for creating details or putting on paint. And if I want to put a lot on, then I use one of these big ones. And then of course, for all the details, like I use one of these little skinny ones. You can see that? So I can see where I've used some of these brushes on here. Like even just using the little bones on the inside of the fish here, I use the skinny brushes. And of course this black. Okay, so let me just explain a little bit about this black paint here. So thank you for making my day. Okay, very inspirational. I enjoyed symbolic meaning for which. Well, thank you. It's always good to see these. I'm glad I'm helping or adding to your understanding of the culture and of the way we see things. But I'm just going to share something with you here about this black. Like, so you look at that black has connected everything together. That black is on all of the stuff. So the black represents the beginning of the universe, according to the Anushnavi people. And it represents the great black void. So when we talk about the beginning in our creation story, we talk about this great black void that was here, and that there was a spirit in that black void, and that spirit sent signals out, four signals out, and no response happened. So the spirit called the signals back and said, as you come back to me, create light in the universe. And at that moment, all the stars were born. And from all the stars, planets began to form, all different kinds of planets, until a planet was formed that could hold life. And that's where the humans come into the story. But what's really interesting about that that story is that it's really talking about the beginning of the Anushnavi Cosmology. And what that is saying is that it is actually the spirit world that called the physical world into being. And because we're so in this physical world, we're kind of trapped in ways of thinking about our place in the universe because we're in this physical world. But we are actually, according to those elders, we're in the second world. We're not in the first. The first world was the spirit world. So that's changes the way, the dynamics of how it is that we exist, is because we started thinking about that we're in the second world. And what does that mean? That means that we are in a physical zone. Because when that light formed in the universe and all the stars were born, those stars represented the physical world. And that's interesting, right? Because it connects right to a prophecy that talks about the time that we would come to this path that divided into two. And we're in that time now, and they said one path is of light and the other one's of dark. So I know exactly what they mean when they talk about these two paths. They're talking about the one's a physical world and one's a spirit world. So it's a choice that we're going to have to make right now, because we're in this zone of technology, where the technology, it could be a really benefit for human beings, but it's not a benefit for nature. Nature is suffering at the hands of our technology. So it's about tempering that technology with that idea that we have to think about the spirit in terms of how is that technology going to affect our lives in the long run. So the long run means 7 generations from now, what are we leaving those guys? That's what this is about. That's what we're at, this crux in the road, it divides into two. How are we going to think about coexisting with nature? Because nature is a relationship that it doesn't equate with technology and industry. Symbolic meaning of your work. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to look at some of the questions here and see if anybody is asking it. Okay, so. Alright. All right. So I guess I'm gonna just about a little bit more about these symbols on the back of the turtle. You can see it goes like this, and it goes around, and it goes back here. That's the way the shape of this message is on the turtle's back. And each one of these represents a moon, and there are 13 moons in a year. And then the segments around the back, there are 28 segments around the back of this turtle. And if you count 28 times 13, it's 364 days a year. So, and it's interesting because quite often nature does show us the cycles of our world. And our world is consistent of cycles. Everything is in this circular motion. Indigenous thinking is circular because we always think about these connections in terms, we don't just think about ourselves. We think about our world in a circle because we have to include everything else when we think about things. And that's the important thing about this Indigenous thinking, is that we do think in circles. I was watching this movie a couple of years ago. It came out, it was called Arrival, and it had these aliens, and they had their ship that was, you couldn't tell who they were or what they knew or anything about them, because it was just like the ship looked like a big seed, a shape like a seed, simple seed. But the way these creatures were communicating, they were communicating in circles with this kind of ink, because these creatures kind of look like, what do they call, cephalopods? So they're like octopus. They had this ink that they used to communicate their signals, and they had complicated communication levels, just like humans. And anyway, so I I made a lot of connections when I started looking at that movie and realizing, wow, this is exactly the way Indigenous people communicate. They think about things in terms of a circle. And the circle, the reason why the circle is important is because in that circle thinking, everybody gets a chance to have a say. It's not just humans that would have a chance to say, even the wildlife has a chance to say something. You know, like even some of our agreements here across this land, like the dish with one spoon, was recognizing the animals that were here too, that we actually had to look after the environment in order to honor that agreement, that wampum belt agreement. The dish with one spoon was about all the Indigenous people around the Great Lakes sharing and all taking responsibility for the future and the well-being of nature. I think that I've never seen an agreement like that yet from these Western communities that came upon our land. They haven't made those kinds of gestures about the future yet, about including the flora and fauna of this continent. It's something to think about in terms of how can we make that more clear, that people could open their minds up and include this much longer version of why we make decisions in the present is about keeping open to this idea that we have to think about the future. We can't just think about satisfying our own needs in the moment, you know. And I think it's been pretty clear this last 4 years with the leadership in the South there, exactly what that looks like if we don't think about the future. We're only thinking about the moment and our, you know, our wealth, what we're going to get out of this time we're here. But long-term thinking is for the real leaders, and I think that other question somebody said about the community and how I feel about being connected with the community, and I think that sharing my knowledge about this culture is about sharing that kind of thinking, that different kind of thinking. That's what I'm leaving behind. Is I'm planting seeds when I go into schools or classrooms, and I go into elementary schools, high schools. I do lectures at every university in Toronto. I've lectured at them all. And so I always leave a message about the future in terms of this cultural understanding and how Indigenous people really look at that, and why it's important that that Indigenous voice become a more, I guess, more common to hear. Because even now, even though we have a lot of people talking about Indigenous people, we don't have a lot of that representation in terms of in industry or politics. It's slowly coming around into the educational institutions across the city now. I'm just going to shut the door here. It's getting kind of noisy there. So I guess maybe we can take a look at my drawing once again, so you can see this is not the whole thing, because that's just one 7-foot panel, and there's 3 of them that make up this whole tapered end that would have gone on that far. But I tried to stick with my original design as much as possible, except I did switch. You see the hole in the sky is at the top of the painting. I put it at the lower end. That's because I did some research and I realized that that's where it is in the sky in terms of these 2 ones here, the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. So I put that so that the hole in the sky is in the right spot in that. So I just and I tried to stick with the original design of the head. I've changed it a little bit. It's become more streamlined. Here's another local artist here. that was Tim. He's a great painter. And okay, let's see. I'm going to see if I can get a couple of questions from here. Okay, is there any more questions out there? I can, anybody have any questions, new questions? Oh, yes, thinking in the future is a great idea for a new mural. Yes, there's a lot of, well, for me, like a lot of that thinking about the future is about the time we're in, and the time we're in is called the eighth fire. And the eighth fire was prophesied by the 7 prophets, the 7 fires that came to the people about 1,200 years ago. It happened, and it happened on the eastern shores of Canada, somewhere in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick. This is where these 7 beings came to probably the Mi'kmaq people or Maliseet or one of those nations along the east coast. And people don't know this, but they're all related to the Anushnavi. So if you look at it, there's a lot of nations that are part of the Anushnavi people. And there's about, well, right now I've got about 32 languages that are all connected together. They call it Algonquin family. So all these people are related. And if you track all of these people, all these different nations that have this Algonquin origin, you'll see that it's actually a big migration across North America, that the language goes across North America like that. It goes right out to the Rocky Mountains. And that's the thing about this, thinking about this kind of history. But getting back to the 7 fires, these were really mysterious beings that came, and they each had a prophecy about the future. And they talked about the people going on a big migration. They talked about a time where people were going to encounter these new people, and they said these new people would be, you wouldn't be able to tell because like who these people were, if they were good or not, because the face of war looks exactly like the face of friendship. You can't tell the difference until they start doing things. And so that's what the Indigenous people were kind of told about these new light-skinned people that were going to come to their territory, their land. And so, of course, we already figured out now at this time that it was the face of war that was brought to our land. It wasn't the face of friendship. And the reason for this, this systemic racism that was executed by the settler communities to change the way people saw Indigenous people and throughout history. And it was also a good way of telling people, setting up future generations who would take a look back at this, that the history, the way it was told, is not telling the real truth about who the Indigenous people were. But anyways, that prophecy, they talked about a time when these children of these new people would come to our elders asking for knowledge. And that was the time that even our own people would have to come to our elders asking for knowledge, because our culture, our language, everything was outlawed until 1960. So after that moment, that's when everybody, all the young people began to realize, well, they didn't like the way history was told, and they began to create these organizations. And one of the most famous ones was called the American Indian Movement. They called it AIM, and they went across North America bringing this culture with them too, because they weren't just allowed to go and be activists. The elders said you had to understand who you were and where you were coming from if you were going to go out there and fight for the people. You couldn't just go out and fight without having a deeper understanding about the purpose of why they would be out there fighting as activists. So those elders back then, they got these guys to participate in their culture. And why that was important is because Indigenous people's identity, it comes from cultural practice. So if you don't have an understanding of your own identity, you won't have a good reason for why you're doing what you do. Just like me right now, like I have a good reason to do what I do because I really understand the culture from a much more deeper place than just these narratives that are quite often wrong about Indigenous people. So those narratives are really important to change. So for me as an artist, that's another goal of mine, is to change the narrative and put out the real history of our people and the depth to which our ancestors, the depth of their reality, because we often don't see just exactly who these Indigenous people are through the media or even through the education system. There's still a lot of room for change there with the education system, because it's too needs to evolve just like we are evolving. We're coming out of a depression. That's what I usually say with the young people. I say we're in a depression, and we're all going to come out of this depression together. And one of the ways in which that depression kind of is because of the cultural loss and the language. That's a depression. So we could crawl up over that hump and go forward from there, but no. This eighth fire is about not doing such a thing like that. The eighth fire is really about going back to take a look at where our ancestors were coming from and what they were seeing in order to go forward. And that's how we get out of the depression. We can't get out of the depression without understanding our identity. Just like those elders did for those young activists in the 60s, that's what we have to do too. We have to go back and get to the source by participating in our culture so we can understand who Indigenous people really are. Because if we don't do that, we're just a shell of the people that we used to be. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so this mural is going into a place right at Dundas Square, and it's called Little Canada. It's a brand new, it's a museum, but it's a museum of miniature landmarks across Canada. All the most famous places you can think of, they've built in miniature. And it's a place to have a tour where you go right across the country. And so this is going to go into one of the main parts there where people will be able to have a meal and buy some souvenirs. And I was asked to create this mural. They want something connected with food. And so that's what made me think of the 13 moon calendar on the turtle's back, because that's about planting and harvesting food off the land. And I thought, wow, this fits perfectly. And then also because it links to Turtle Island, and then it links to our technology like the medicine wheel, the petroform medicine wheel, and how Indigenous people had this technology that nobody really knows about until they start seeing this kind of art out there. And I've never seen anybody paint these kinds of things before. Morrisseau did paint these kinds of things, but he didn't paint it in terms of it being a teaching tool like I'm doing it. So this is more like a teaching tool, but it's art at the same time. And let's see, what was the other question? So right at Dundas Square, that's where this is going to be. I'm not sure when Little Canada will open up because of this COVID event that's happening. And yeah, you can check out Little Canada on Instagram. You can find it and they'll probably let you know when they're going to open. But as far as me being a painter, I guess I've been a painter, a serious painter, probably since I was about 18. I mean, I've always drawn, and I painted in high school, but I became a serious painter when I first bought my first canvas and I started buying my first paints and brushes. That's when I became a painter. So I was 18, and I started painting these really iconic images of what I thought was Indigenous culture at the time. And it's so different from what I paint right now. Because what I'm painting right now is a culmination of experience, knowledge, and understanding of what woodland style painting really is all about. So from where I am now, sorry, I'm going to just turn it to the side so you can see this whole image. What it looks like here. Yeah. Let's see. So, so how do I get these? Where do my ideas come from? How do I narrow it down? It's pretty tough because when you have so much knowledge, sometimes it's hard to pick one thing, but it is good to focus on one thing. And I think what helps me to focus on this idea that this is going to be, this turtle is going to represent this big idea in one package was just the painting style. So the painting style itself, this is woodland style. This is, I'd say this is like the modern version of woodland style painting, because it's a cross between that kind of big, kind of broad, simple design as Murals was creating to having more intricate little facets of that design. And it's still there, because when you look at this, you can see that on the, even on the neck of this, I'm still have that black line in between all these big shapes. And that really creates this feel of that woodland style painting with all that black lines that's connecting all the shapes together. And I guess I think it's the narrative that helps me to narrow it down. So if I'm talking about a particular subject, I'm not going to put a bunch of different things together. I put the things that related, especially with this painting, like I put all the things that relate to this turtle and the 13 moons, because I put in the stars were part of this story. And then because it's the turtle, I put the muskrat in there because it represents Turtle Island and the Great Flood story. And I put the petroforms in here because that petroform is the same thing as the turtle's back. It has the way in which you detect which season is coming up, whether it's time for harvesting, a time for planting seeds. That's what these different stones represent around the circle here. So the way it would have been done is that the person looking and operating this thing would sit here, and then at a certain time, probably like in the early morning, very early morning, they would watch how the stars would be hitting these parts on this medicine wheel. So if the star came down, and let's say it landed on this one here, the star formation would come down on the horizon line and touch this one. Then they would know that, let's say that one's the one for going fishing for the suckers or the fish. That'd be the sucker moon right there. So these could represent those moons, and they could represent the star formations that they only hit that horizon line at that certain time of the year. And that's when they know that that's the right time to go fishing. So connecting all these ideas together, I guess was one way to focus and narrow that creativity down into one place, that you would only be talking about the one subject. Well, thanks for the question. Anyone else? Anyone else have any questions? I wish I had more of my paintings here, because then we could talk about some other paintings too that I've been working on, but it's fine. So, I know that some people aren't sure about like my crazy fish here, but look at his teeth. So I know that some of the children when I work in elementary schools, they say, "Oh, how come you have such pointy, sharp teeth?" And I just tell them, I say, "Well, you know, if you look at the real fish when you catch them, they all have little teeth like that." And I think that was Morris's way of just showing that he's like his experiences off the land. And you know, Morrisville probably went fishing many times and had to gut and clean his own fish and scrape the scales off the back and peel it open, and he could see the inside, and he knew how certain organs looked inside the fish, so he would create those organs on his fish the same way. And even the bears that Morrisville was working on, his bears would be really striking looking because even though they weren't very accurate, the bears had the gestures in real life, how the bear would have stood and looked, and you know how the bears operated physically. So when you look at Morrisville's bears, you can tell that those visions of those bears are because he actually saw them out in the wild moving about, and he saw how they were standing and how they kind of operated when they walked across the land. But sometimes I like to stick with a very simple design, like this one. It's really simple because it looks like just the bones of the fish, and then this one here is like the, you know, the liver. These are the bones of the fish, and there's the back, and of course there's the heart of the fish. And then this color is really important, like especially when you're doing woodland style painting, because this color represents history, and it represents the pictographs that you could find across Canada on rocks. That when you found those pictographs, they're this color, and the reason why they're this color is that represents the red ochre. And I'm going to tell you a secret about that red ochre and how come that paint lasts for 7,000 years or 5,000 years. And if you buy the paint from the paint store and you put a big splash of that paint on the same rocks, and this is a true story. Some people vandalized these pictographs, you know, like 30 years ago. They threw a big bucket of paint all over these pictographs. And so what happened is the weather eventually, first of all, it took all the pigment out, and then eventually started wearing the paint right off the rocks. And still underneath that paint was the pictograph was still sitting there stuck on the rock. So that pictograph paint is made with fish oil. So fish oil and the pigment, red ochre, are mixed together, and that's how they paint those images. And then that was considered a sacred color or a medicine. It wasn't just a paint color, it was a sacred medicine, was to use that red ochre. Because the red ochre represents us. It represents our color skin, and it represents that direction in the medicine wheel that they call the, you know, for the Anushnavi, it's in the north, that or the south. It represents the red. So when you look at the medicine wheel, you see the yellow, red, black, and white. And so that red represents the south, and it represents new life. And what was I going to say now? Yeah, so that's why it represents like a medicine. It's not just paint. It actually represents something that, and that's why the birch bark scrolls, when you find birch bark scrolls, real ones, the pigment that they're using is the red ochre, and they use that in all those because it's a sacred story that's being told. And I guess that's why Morrisville used that color in his paintings too, is because it was representing that sacredness. And you know, and quite often that colors in different parts of this little mural here. Okay, looks like, is it, oh hey, did we end?
I don't
What time is it? How long are we supposed to talk for?
I don't know.
It's like almost 3.
They
Okay.
want you to say that after.
It's 3:30 now.
Yeah, they want you to say that after. Is it ended? I don't know.
Okay, well, hey, looks like we're gonna go now because it's almost 3:30. And I just want to thank everybody for listening in and hearing what I have to say. And maybe we can do this in person in the future sometime. We'll do a talking circle somewhere. Maybe we'll do it in the Humber River or something, where we can actually go and see some of the things that I'm talking about. And so I wish everybody a good week and blessings for everybody for the winter. I know that they talk about COVID possibly getting worse, so I wish everybody safe travels across their territories. And yeah, you guys can always connect with me on Instagram or Facebook, or you can connect with me on email at tecumsehcollective.com. Oh, sorry, tecumsehcollective@hotmail.com. So, anyways, you guys take care, and Nindinaway Magani Dek, which means all my relations, which means we are all related. Oh, Miigwech, everyone. Bye.